Hello friends, welcome back to the bench. Thank you very much for joining me. Our patients, are two boards sent by David. So they are labeled. This one has bent pins, need LGA socket replaced. Let's take a look at this one first, see what kind of socket it is. Is this a replacement socket that you sent me? Oh yeah, it looks like it. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay, this is, what is it? 1200? This is a nice board. Two full-size PCI Express boards, one, two half-size, and we have regular PCI. Huh, that's amazing. And a little PCI Expresses over here, two of them. Now heat sinks don't look very big, so this is not like very powerful board, but we have 6 memory slots. This is a very interesting board. The socket is indeed done. I can see one pin is completely missing. I think, at least that's what it looks like. And some are bent. Now, I don't have a CPU to test it, but we'll do some measurements. We have nice outline on the socket. This isn't 1200, is it? No. This is bigger than 1200. This might be that 2011-3 or 2011. Was it 2011 or something like that? All right. So that's board number 1. This one says shorted, turns on but no display. So it doesn't post. That's how I would describe it. We have a big letter here. Okay. Oh, a big handwritten letter. I tried updating the BIOS, but upon completion, it tries to power on and powers off. I have it for blah blah blah, botched BIOS update. Okay, so if it's botched BIOS update, we should be able to recover from that easily. Well, maybe not easily, but we should be able to recover from it. This is the same motherboard, but the customer sent us a CPU, so we should be able to test it. What kind of DDR is this RAM? DDR3. I think I have a DDR3 stick. Now check this out. This is unusual. I haven't seen anything like this. See those caps? They are protected by this big bracket over here. And this isn't behind CPU. This is behind. Is this like a dual CPU board? Look at this. So there's a big chip over there. This is definitely PCH, right? And I thought that's what the caps were for. But here we have something that requires a lot of caps at the back. So usually that's CPU, GPU, something like that. And a big heat sink on it. So maybe it's like internal GPU or something. It's packed to the brim with components. All the components are really tight on the board. Look at all this. Oh, what happened here? Okay, this isn't botched BIOS update. Okay. No, this isn't botched BIOS update. This is botched soldering job. Okay, there's a chance once we actually resolder these properly, this might work. Yeah. Well, this looks like it definitely it has been performed without a microscope. Typically, you don't need a microscope for that. But at least what you have to do is cover these plastic components. this is for IDE, right? I don't expect anyone to use IDE interface over here, especially since look how many SATAs we have over here. A whole array, right? And in addition, we have two IDE. Oh no, this is okay. Oh no, this is IDE. This is for a floppy, the smaller cable. I haven't seen those in a long time. So this definitely is an older board, but this is like very high-end board. I have never seen a board like this. But looks like, well, we'll see. We're gonna have to do both of these. So this one will first have to have the BIOS resoldered. And just for the heck of it, let's check if we have proper connections, but it looks like it should work. It just looks bad, but yeah, the connections are there, and there are no bridges. It just looks really bad. Okay, so I think the title of this video will be how not to update BIOS. So here's our problem, right? Both chips were removed and both chips were written to. We don't know if the backup has been saved. I'm gonna need to contact the customer and ask if he has a backup. If he does, then this is recoverable. Otherwise, this is not recoverable. And why is it not recoverable? So, as you can see, we have two BIOS chips over here, right? Why do we need two? Well, Gigabyte and a few other manufacturers do a dual BIOS boards, or manufacture dual BIOS boards. As far as I know, the B BIOS, which is a secondary BIOS, and M BIOS is the master BIOS, the main BIOS that the motherboard reads from to boot. Now, as far as I know, the B BIOS should override the M BIOS in case the board detects that the main BIOS is corrupted. So it's kind of auto recovery kind of thing. And typically, if I remember correctly, if you do perform that, so if you mess up the BIOS update, the board will boot, no display, and detect that there's an issue with the BIOS. Copy, I don't know if it copies the whole BIOS or not, but basically recover the BIOS and reboot like twice, something like that. And you're back to the original BIOS, right? So it's a nice protection. Now, how do you update BIOS? Well, not like this. So you only do it this way if you want to spend more time. The BIOS update is not performed by removing data from the chip and uploading different data to the chip, like different version of BIOS. BIOS update doesn't come as a whole assembly, only certain parts. Certain parts of the BIOS that are called regions need to stay on the BIOS. So if you update the BIOS, you update just a certain region of the whole binary. The way we do it is you dump the BIOS. First you run it through the ME analyzer to find out what version of flash image tool you need to use. Once you establish that, you decompress it in flash image tool and you just update the BIOS region. On top of that, you have few other regions, and the most important region is the ME region, coincidentally the smallest region. So what happens if you just replace the BIOS? The board might boot, the whole computer might boot, but there's going to be issues. At least some of the drivers are not going to work, some of the functionality of the board is not going to work. It's maybe not very common that happens, but the BIOS does have the ability to decide what voltages should be where in some cases, right? Some of these power supplies that we have over here they need to support different devices that might, or different versions of the devices that might require different voltages. So the BIOS needs to have that information, which voltage to use for which, and if it's corrupted, if it's the wrong BIOS or whatever, it might just make a wrong decision and just send a higher voltage somewhere where the lower voltage is required. As I said, this is rather fringe case, but the manufacturer of the board will tell you that if you botch the BIOS update, you might cause the damage, permanent damage to the board. It is possible, but most commonly it's just one of the drivers or few of the drivers will not work. Now what I can do, since we have two motherboards, right, and this one looks like okay, this one was messed with as well. And again with BIOS, why would you even touch the BIOS? You don't need to touch this one. If you want to update BIOS, update this one only. But they were both looks like they were updated. But the point is that if I just transfer BIOS from this board to this board, it won't work. I mean, the board might boot, and we might even be able to boot to Windows, but definitely some drivers are not going to work. Some functionality of this board is not going to work without the original ME region. If you do want to update BIOS, well, the BIOS update that you download of the website, that's not a whole BIOS, right? It's just those portions that need to be updated. You always need the original BIOS to make the BIOS update. You're not going to be replacing the whole BIOS. So the best option is to boot the board, go to BIOS, hit whatever F5 or whatever for QFlash tool, and it'll just tell you which USB port to insert the BIOS update. It will update the BIOS. If anything goes wrong, the BIOS will be reverted from the backup BIOS or BIOS. If that's not an option, in this case this is not an option because the board doesn't post, so we can go into BIOS to run the QFlash. In this case we need to remove the chip. Well, not in this case, because in this case, you know, there's not much we can do. But in those cases where the board doesn't post for whatever reason, and you know it's the BIOS, and for some reason it has not recovered itself, then it makes sense to desolder it. But then again, you need to run it through ME Analyzer and open it in a flash image tool, and then just replace the BIOS region, not the entire assembly. All right, let's do this. Let's remove the chip. I'm pretty sure I don't need to modify the adapter to read this chip, but I guess we'll see about that. And let's run it through ME Analyzer. Then if we have the proper flash image tool, let's decompress it and see if it even decompresses. If it doesn't decompress, then it's definitely corrupted. Something not right. If it does decompress, let's see what's inside, and I guess go from there. As I said, I can just read the BIOS from the other board and transplant it over here, but that's not gonna work. I know it's not gonna work, but at least we can get the board to boot, to post, right? Sure, something's not gonna work, but at least the board is posting, right? So we can charge bench fee. All right, let's see what we can do. Alrighty, so what we did, we took the BIOS from the other board, put it on this one. I did save the BIOS from this board, but if it's corrupted, then also the battery is 0, 0. So this typically when the board doesn't boot, always check the battery, because some boards will not boot if the battery is dead. Okay, we have 2 amps on vCore, OCP. Let's boot the board, but first let's connect the display. There's no HDMI on it. For that purpose, I got this nice little handy device, and it has the regular, what's this called, VGA, right? DVI and HDMI. So makes it easy, doesn't require external power. It will not work on some more modern boards, I assume. I haven't checked, but that's what I've experienced with other boards. These older cards, they just don't work on them. Not sure what's up with that, but let's see if this one works. So if it doesn't display anything, well, it might be that it doesn't like this display adapter. And I never even actually tested this adapter. I received it a couple days ago, so we don't know. Let's see. Alright, vCore. Okay, main power. And the boot. Alright, it boots. We have 1.8, 22 watts going to the CPU. So the CPU is working. We're gonna have to terminate it. Okay. It's booting. How do I know it's booting? Because the OCP went up. So, I mean, OCP reacted. That's output short protection. So we drained more than 2 amps to the vCore. So I need to put some heatsink, some serious heatsink on it, and go from there. So if the 2 amps stays, that was like 1.8 amp, if it stays the same on the vCore and nothing happens, then the board is not booting. But if after like a minute or two the power to the CPU grows, that means the BIOS most likely loaded. We have 22 watts on vCore. There's no display. There's plenty of LEDs lit up over here that are probably telling us something. It does turn off when you click the button, the power button. Oh, it actually rebooted, which is normal after the BIOS update. Or it's trying to recover BIOS from the B BIOS, and it's unable because B BIOS was updated as well. The fan is changing speeds. This board is booting. 23 watts on the CPU. So it might not like, oh, the GPU is getting warm. It might not like my GPU. The GPU could be faulty. But it looks like the GPU is getting warm. So it is getting its power. And it is trying to do something. But it's not displaying anything. If the fan is changing speeds, that means the board has booted. Let's run it without the memory, and it should give us what, like one long and 2 short beeps, something like that. Oh, EC is getting very hot. I think this is EC. Okay, EC chip is shorted. I'm not sure if this is EC actually, because if the EC chip is shorted, oh yeah, this is definitely, I don't even need the thermal camera. This is burning my finger. So that was caused by the BIOS. That's why the manufacturers always warn you about those updates, right? Like if it works, don't, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, basically, right? So the chip that is shorted is this one, this chip. It looks like EC chip to me, but by the looks of it, let's see if it's embedded controller or not. Yeah, you can see that discoloration. This should have been obvious. You see discoloration? Yeah. Oh, you don't. There. See that discoloration? It was definitely overheated. And this region over here. Yeah. So this was shorted, or this is shorted now. Now the question is, did it get shorted because of the BIOS update? It is possible. And what is this? Okay, so looks like it was available some time ago from China, of course. No, Greece. Oh, interesting. Now it doesn't say what it is. Controller IC chip. So if it's controller IC chip, it's probably microcontroller. So it most likely needs to be programmed. It needs software in it. So the replacement is not quite an option, or at least it's not going to work if we just replace it. We can see that it has plenty of resistors on the output, so it's definitely some kind of MCU, right? It controls a lot of stuff, and that's why it's not booting, because it's shorted. So your initial, who is it for? David. Your initial hunch on this board was correct, that it's shorted. But this is the problem with this board. So I don't expect this to be an EC chip, because if this was an EC and it was shorted, the board, I would expect the board would not boot, because it's the EC chip that tells the PSU to turn on. If the EC is not working, the board is not going to boot. So probably this is EC, also overheated, or maybe it's just dirty, but it looks like it also has suffered some overheating. And this one too. That's interesting. What's the probability that all of them are shorted? I would say none, because the board is booting, right? It turns on the PSU. If the EC is shorted, the board will not boot, unless there might be an exception when there's another microcontroller that is responsible just for that, and it talks to EC. It's possible, but well, I'm definitely not familiar with the architecture of this board. Plenty of chips that I don't recognize. What's the moral of this video? Don't update the second BIOS, the B BIOS. You should never have the need to mess with the B BIOS. Always stick to the M BIOS, and always use the Q flash on the board in the current BIOS. Let the BIOS update itself. Don't perform the physical update, meaning physical reflashing of the chip, because it can go horribly wrong. We don't know if this is what caused the damage. It is coincidentally right next to the BIOS. The BIOS chips are here, and here's the chip that is shorted. So maybe by replacing the BIOS, maybe during the procedure or during first initial testing, there was a short, which should not cause a damage, even if you shorted the positive and negative, right, which are not next to each other. They're actually on the opposite sides of the chip, probably for that reason. Even if you shorted those, that shouldn't result in this chip shorting, even if this chip actually supplies power to the BIOS, which I wouldn't expect that. It's usually just a linear regulator somewhere, or the 3.3 power supply that does that. Or 5 volts, with depending on what BIOS this is. This might actually, I think this is 5 volt 5-volt TTL BIOS. Alrighty, we're gonna stop here. Thank you guys very much for watching. I do appreciate you. I hope you found this useful, and I shall see you in the next one.